Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Gaming in the Elton Years, Episode 5. And today we're talking about a very special, very awesome game called
Iromono Hakkenden.
with a very special guest by the name of
David.
Woo!
Hey!
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, would you just like to introduce yourself and talk about what it is you do?
Sure. I have a channel under RndStranger where I regularly post videos about flubbing my lines already. where I post videos going through the system libraries of various Japanese consoles. I did the Famicom, one video a day for almost 3 years. And currently I'm in the middle of doing the Famicom disk system. I also did the Cassette Vision, Super Cassette Vision, Atari 2800, and I'm probably going to keep at this for a while.
Yeah, that's how I found you. And I just want to thank you because you're actually the reason I vaguely understand the rules of Mahjong.
I vaguely understand the rules of Mahjong.
And your commitment to explaining the rules every single time you have to cover one of these seemingly endless Famicom Mahjong games is the only reason I even vaguely understand the game.
Well, I can tell you that Mahjong is a set-building game similar to Rummy. I get a lot of people joking with me about that.
I think that's actually a pretty good way to kind of segue into what we're talking about tonight, because we're talking about a Famicom-style adventure game, which there were a lot of in Japan, but it's something that didn't really make its way to the West, with a couple of exceptions.
I think the only major one that occurs to me is Princess Tomato in the Salad Kingdom.
Not strictly Famicom, but it's a similar style, would be Snatcher, the Hideo Kojima game.
There is a Snatcher connection with Iromono Hakkenden.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah, because Natsume, the developer of Iromono Hakkenden, had broken off of Konami just 1 year before releasing the game. Some of the crew helped develop Snatcher.
That's incredible, yeah. So, you mentioned this is a Natsume game. When I first learned about that, it kind of threw me a little, because I think a lot of people who are into, like, obscurities and esoterica of, like, the NES library will know Natsume as, like, the company that made these, like, really high-quality action games with really low print runs.
Yep.
So it's really interesting that this second game developed is this adventure game, and so was their first one.
Right. Their first game, that was... I think here it's Tohu
Kenbun Roku.
Thank you. Another comedy adventure game based on the adventures of Marco Polo.
Yeah, I watched your video on that, and it has functionally the same interface.
That interface was originally used in Portopia Satsujin Jiken, or the Portopia serial murder case, which kind of kicked off the idea of console adventure games altogether.
Yeah, so Portopia started off on the PC, and it used this text parser interface that a lot of 90s adventure games people are probably familiar with on the PC did use. So you would type in, like, look at key, or like open door, or something like that. And when they ported it to the Famicom, they had to redesign the interface to work on this console. So it had this menu-based interface, and it really took off, and it led to this explosion of games like this.
Right, and most of them stuck to being mysteries for quite a while, though we started to see people pull away from that in 1988. Both Nintendo and Konami made fairy tale-based ones over on the disk system, and over here on the regular Famicom, Natsume has their comedy adventures.
Yeah, so this is a comedy parody adventure game. But an aspect of that completely went over my head initially was the name Iromono Hakkenden. Because we were talking, like, when we were planning this episode, we were talking about it, and you were mentioning, like, there's a literary parallel in this, and I just went, oh yeah, of course there is, because the story is about this rich person dying and then pick which of their daughters will inherit their estate. And I was like, oh, it's King Lear.
King Lear's not a bad comparison.
Yeah, it's actually based on... what was the name of the book, the full name?
The full name is Nanso Satomi Hakkenden.
Yeah, and that's a book that, like, prior to this, I had no awareness that this thing existed. And then when I started looking into it for this episode, I realized that, oh, this is up there with, like, Jiraiya or Suikoden or something. As, like, this is the place where all of those tropes I keep seeing in Japanese media are actually kind of coming from.
Oh yeah, if you know about the book, then you see its influence everywhere.
Yeah, and like one of the key plot points of the novel is that there's these 8, what are they like pearls or beads or something?
Beads, prayer beads.
Yeah. And they're scattered across the world, and people have to unite them to bring them together again.
Yeah, one winds up at each special warrior who comes together after they have their own separate adventures.
Yeah, and I'm looking at that and I'm realizing, oh, this is like kind of obviously the Dragon Balls are sort of descended from this, but also like all those JRPG plots I used to play about, like, we have to unite the crystals or something like that. Particularly when you were saying, like, every warrior had their own prayer bead. And I'm like, oh yeah, Final Fantasy 1, every warrior in that game appears holding a crystal.
For a lot of Japanese media, if it's all about bringing a team together, there's a good chance that they're dipping at least a toe into Hakkenden.
And yeah, I streamed Idol Hakkenden with Sin. Sin had never played it or seen it before, and she had quite a bit to say about how much this reminded her of a specific anime she watches.
Sin, there is a rather, well, I shouldn't say famous, it's probably completely forgotten by now, but there are several anime adaptations. Have you watched one of those?
No. Which are those?
There's literally one titled Shin Satomi Hakkenden. In fact, they made a video game out of it, which is why I know that title off the top of my head.
And it's based on the video game?
No, the anime is based on the book, and then they made a game based on the anime.
And it's not the game we're talking about now.
No.
Okay.
It was released like 2 weeks after this game, just to maximize confusion.
I guess so.
Yeah, that one's a RPG by Micronix, so nobody wants to talk about it.
I love Micronix so much. I guess having brought up Micronix, we can sort of segue into the publisher of this game, Toachiki, who didn't publish anything by Micronix, but they probably best known for a game that didn't even come out here, which is the infamously unplayably bad Garfield game called Garfield: A Week of Garfield.
Oh, yeah!
That's pretty bad.
Almost as good as the ET game.
I actually think their Sherlock Holmes game is worse, but it's a good competition there between them.
The best part is, if you look up Toachiki on Wikipedia, it doesn't list them as, like, they made the following or they published the following. It just says they were responsible for the following.
Oh.
And, yes, Sin, you watched me play this.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying that, like, a lot of the characters and tropes and things in it, they were things you were familiar with from anime that you've seen.
Yeah. Well, you have, the main character who is no good, but actually is really, really talented, which was obviously modeled after Katekyo Hitman Reborn, the first anime ever created. Yeah.
Of course. And also the plot being that, like, you have to go recruit the gang of people.
Yeah, they go collecting all the people with all the different personalities and specialized skills that are required to complete this mission of becoming the ultimate idol, I guess. It's like if American Idol was a little more exciting, If
American Idol had people fighting like that, I think I'd watch it more.
And yeah, like we were saying, this didn't come out in the West, but it did end up with enough of like a cult following that it actually has like 2.5, I'll say, fan translations. There's the one that we played, which is like the definitive question mark one, which is a fairly faithful, as far as I can tell, translation of the Japanese script. And that has a little update that's been applied to it where the song that you have to complete to finish the game, in the translation that we played, which was slightly older, it's called You Are the Derpy Girl. They changed it to You Are the Ditzy Girl.
Yeah, I think the Japanese term there is really closer to goofy. Idle Hakkenden is actually considered by some people to be the originator of an entire genre of nonsense songs. So that's part of it.
Wait, what are nonsense songs? Are we talking like Britney
Basically,
Spears?
pop songs where the lyrics are just goofy. They don't mean anything.
Ah, that's Chacaron.
There you go.
The other fan translation of this is this kind of like weird high concept project where they quote unquote woolsify the game. So like people who are younger than us / didn't grow up with the same kind of game space around us might need Woolsey explained to them. Do you want to have a shot at that?
So, Ted Woolsey was the translator for some very early RPG ports, particularly Final Fantasy II, which of course is Final Fantasy IV. He's best. You probably know the line, "You spoony bard." That's one of his inclusions. He tended to be a little bit loose with the translation, trying to get the tone rather than the text. One of the challenges for him was there was no space on the cartridge. So Japanese text is very dense. So if you try to change that to English, you lose a lot of space. Flip side is that the Japanese language is less dense at conveying information, so sometimes you can make that space up by not including the repetitions that occur naturally in Japanese conversation. But Woolsey had to find room for the whole script in what was already there.
And what this like Woolsification of Idle Hakkenden does is it treats it like if Idle Hakkenden actually came out on the NES in the late 1980s, what would it have been like? So they retitle it Popstar Debut. They get rid of all the cultural, like, Japanese references in it. There's a character in it who dresses very androgynously. They're a girl in Idle Hakkenden, but Popstar Debut makes them a boy. They rename the main character Sabrina, things like that, to try to sort of westernize it. And yeah, I watched someone play it. I didn't play it myself, and it just seemed weird to me that you would do this, like, kind of comedy project translation of a game that was already a comedy.
Translating comedy is hard, and that's always been true for everyone, regardless of the medium.
So we talked about how this is descended from these Famicom adventure games that are themselves descended from Portopia Serial Murder Case, which is itself descended from PC adventure games. I guess in a similar way to the way that like the Dragon Quest games are descended from wizardry, trying to like squish wizardry down and refine it to work on a cartridge. So there's a lot of differences in these Famicom adventure games when you compare them to like PC adventure games that Westerners would know. So if you take a game like King's Quest, which I guess is like the sort of Portopia equivalent for PC adventure games, that has situations where you can die very, very easily. Like, you make a bad decision, you're just dead. Does not happen in Idle Hakkenden, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't happen in most Famicom adventure games.
There are some that have potential to be fatal, but as a rule of thumb, they're more gentle.
There's also a very annoying thing that happens in Western PC adventure games from this era, which is referred to within the fandom as the Walking Dead state, where, like, you will need an item later in the game to do something, but there's nothing stopping you using it before that, and if you do that and save, you've lost the item and you can never finish the game, and you just won't realize that you've done it. Idle Hakkenden, there's a lot of items in Idle Hakkenden that are necessary to solve puzzles, but if this is not the time to use them, it just won't let you use them. Averts that Walking Dead state entirely. Another thing Idle Hakkenden does is that even though it's nominally set in, like, one location, it's structured in a series of acts that are each set in, like, one or two locations, and you just can't go to the other ones. So it'll be like, our goal here is to go to, like, one town or one building, and you're there the whole act, instead of having this big, confusing, interconnected world. So everything's very, very focused.
That's a common structure for adventure games at that point, or at least the console adventure games. People using the one that people might be familiar with Princess Tomato, you always had Percy tripping and dumping all of the red herring items as you moved into a new area that you couldn't leave.
One thing I really appreciate about Idle Hakkenden that helps give it personality in terms of its interface is that because you're playing as this, like, ditzy wannabe pop star, she has commands that fit that. So she's got the usual stuff you'd expect, like use, move item, talk, but she's also got 3 that are sing, dance, and act dumb.
She also has a winning smile.
Yeah.
And those are all used to progress the game and solve puzzles, but you can use them at any time, and if you do it at the wrong time, you'll just get a piece of nonsense flavor dialogue, like, please don't dance for no reason.
I think they should allow her to dance wherever she wants.
So that kind of brings us into the story of Idle Hakkenden. Sin, you watched me stream the whole thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What do you remember of the story?
Well, a very wealthy woman is getting old, so she would like to pass her fortune onto one of her 3 daughters. One of the daughters is like, I think, a business genius.
Uh-huh.
The other one is like a very accomplished scientist, and the third one is just Erika. And yeah, so the 2 daughters that are super accomplished don't see Erika as competition, which is a little bit sad. But Erika has a dream, and she's going to follow it. She's going to become the best idol singer there is.
Mm-hmm.
We play as Erika, by the way.
Yep. And yeah, throughout it, the story sort of changes from being about, like, oh, Erika's going to get out there and follow her dreams, to being, like, what I think is a satire of late 80s Japanese television culture, which obviously I'm not super familiar with. So I think it's a situation where, like, I'm getting the broad strokes of the plot, but there's probably a bunch of, like, little references and nuances that are going over my head.
Oh yeah, it is packed. Your opponents in the original Japanese version are the Iromono Gang. So Iromono is a term for variety show, which is a structure that dominates Japanese television. I don't know if either of you have sat down and watched Japanese TV, but you'll always find something on where it's a panel of comedians or celebrities just doing something, watching variety acts, commenting on things.
So I guess we'll talk a little bit about, like, the story itself. The story's broken into 5 acts. Each act is kind of a little self-contained story on its own, and I streamed the whole thing from start to finish on the channel. It only took me about 2 hours. Like, it's not a particularly long game if you know what you're doing.
Even if you don't, it's very quick.
You just gotta choose all the options over and over again.
That is always a flaw with these adventure games from this period. Eventually, it comes down to just trying everything until the game lets you go through.
Yeah, and I feel like that would be frustrating in other situations, but because Idle Hakkenden is a comedy, usually when you try something that doesn't work, you at least get, like, a joke or a stupid face or something. And it also fits the character of Erika, who's just, like, this complete ditz and just doing random stuff all the time, so it sort of still flows for me pretty well. Like, a good example of the puzzle structure in this game is, like, Act 1... Erika has to get her fortune, which is inside this little, like, fortune ball thing. And the solution to that is you have to go to an aquarium and give it to a sea otter. Because otters crack things open, and then when the otter cracks it open, it sinks to the bottom of the tank. So in order to get the attention of the diver who's in the tank, you have to do a dance. And then the diver won't do the dance unless you bribe them. It's just this sort of nonsense collection of, like, you have to give the otter an ashtray to make it break the thing, so it's... You have to steal an ashtray and give it to an otter, and then you have to dance and then give someone some candy. Like, it's real just nonsense, but there's so few items and so few locations and so few commands, like, in each individual chapter, that it kind of still works, because the number of choices you can make is so minimal anyway. Like, you'll eventually figure the nonsense solution out.
You have to sing a song for the otter to convince it to smash the ball for you as well, and I don't know if you've noticed, but anytime that Erika sings in the game and you get lyrics, it matches the music that's playing in the game at that point. So all of them are actually singable songs, and there's even a CD and karaoke releases for these.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was looking up versions of Kimi wa Hoi Hoi Musume, which is like the kind of main song in this, and people are still doing like vocal covers of that song. Like, people still remember it. You can find like Vocaloid versions and live performances of it still being made today. So it might actually be a good idea now to just go over like the 8 characters in this story, like the 8 Hakkenden or whatever they are.
Sure. You've got Hoshimi, who you start out with, and she's a fortune teller. She can foresee things, has a weird way of talking anytime you consult with her, hangs out with you for most of the game. Then there's Tamaka, who you recruit from the candy store, and she's good at business, she does exactly one thing during the game. Aoyama, who is a hacker, and you have to help her. Well, we'll get to that point in the story. Then Yachiyo, who's a tough-looking woman who is a music producer. Murasaki, who makes fireworks. Kaido, who's a sukaban, or gang leader. And finally, Momomi, who's just an Idol fan. Erika just picks up and goes, yeah, you're number 8.
Yeah.
So, quick question for the two of you. Which is the best girl?
Oof.
I think my favorite was Momoi, because she's the one that has this like encyclopedic knowledge of facts about these like washed up entertainment stars that you meet. And in the chapter she's introduced in, quite a few of the puzzles are basically just getting her to repeat facts about someone back to themselves in order to flatter them that they're still remembered.
I like the girl that was going to be like kicking everybody's butts.
Yeah, Kaido, the gang leader. Part of a whole trend at that time of Sukaban protagonists. I think I would go with Murasaki and her fireworks. Any woman who can blow stuff up is great. If there's one thing that disappointed me with Idol Hakkenden, it's that I'd want all of them to do more.
Yeah.
So many of them, you recruit them and they're just in the background then for the rest of the game.
So the first act of the story is basically Erika realizing that she has this like destiny to be this great idol, and that's what's going to help her beat her sisters in this contest. And she does that through a combination of Hoshimi, who is a fortune teller, that's why the fortune ball's introduced, and also the sea otter. The second act is about Erika going on this journey into the mountains to track down this reclusive former anchor star to be her mentor.
Right. It's she's based on Hirumi Miyako, who was an enka singer in the, I want to say, 60s. So it's kind of that pop culture reference that's woven throughout the game.
Right. Yeah. And that's an example of what I was talking about, where like, even if you're playing it translated, the specifics of who that character is and like what they represent and everything, that doesn't come across because it's a specific cultural reference that you can't really translate.
Yeah, they should have just called her Cher or something.
Oh, that would have been good, actually. That would have worked out perfectly.
And that kind of sets up that, like, the back half of this game is going to be about, like, retired or washed up or fallen entertainment stars who are desperate to get attention. And consequently, to get attention, they're joining this legion who, like you said in Japanese, they're called the Iromono Gang, which is like variety show gang. But in the version we played, they're just called the Kookies.
That's not a bad way to approach it.
Yeah, and they're led by this mysterious figure who's just called the Kookie King.
King, yeah.
And the Kookie King is revealed to be kind of manipulating everything Erika's going through behind the scenes. This is revealed in these ominous cutscenes throughout the game. Because this is a comedy, you're just straight up told this and you can't really do anything about it. You just sort of watch Erika stumble into this man's ridiculous plan.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Kookie King's machinations lead us into Act 3, which is kind of what I was talking about with Momoi, where you're breaking into a studio to find the lyrics of this song that Erika's gonna sing to become famous. And the studio is populated by all these, like, faded former stars who aren't popular anymore. And the way that you, like, kind of win this section is you get Momoi to just basically mention that she remembers who they are to them, and the flattery kind of, like, disarms them. But like prior to that, when you meet them, they're all frantically working out and doing all this aerobics, and they're talking about how, like, no, we have to stay in shape because being on weird sports variety shows is the only gig we can still get. And yeah, the way that resolves itself is that Erika challenges them to a dance-off, and you win it by stealing their oxygen cylinders while Momoe's flattery has distracted them.
Yeah, yeah.
I would think that sucking on an oxygen can would interrupt the choreography of a dance routine, but what do I know?
And yeah, there's this subplot in Act 3 where in order to get the lyrics to the song Erika wants, you have to blackmail one of the studio heads with, like, information that he was in a relationship with one of his idols, and that's kind of, like, as edgy as Idol Hakkenden's satire gets, because prior to this point it's been like, oh, aren't variety shows, like, weird and stupid and embarrassing, but it sort of verges into, like, actually this idol stuff's really weird and exploitative.
Yeah, at the time, 1980, this is 1989 that this game was released, the idol phenomenon was still relatively new. They started cropping up about 84, 85 in Japan. So I don't think people really had as much awareness of how exploitative the whole system was yet. Though it was there right from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And Act 3 also has one of my favorite puzzles in the game, which is that Hoshimi, who's a fortune teller, says that her powers will only work if she sees stars. And the solution is to pull out a baseball bat and beat her over the head with it.
So she sees the stars around her head.
Yeah, as soon as she said that, I'm going, I am not going to have to hit her with a baseball bat, am I? Yep, yes, you do.
Which is pretty extreme. But, you know, I think before that, I was actually wondering about this. We walk into a room full of sumo wrestlers, right? I'm not sure how, but all the oxygen is sucked out of the room. And then they all kind of faint, but we don't because we have an oxygen tank. So did those wrestlers actually die or what?
You know, I'd have to look. I hope it said that they just passed out, but I'm not sure.
I mean, I didn't see any paramedics, so I don't know. Did we just leave them there?
Oh, you definitely left them there. They're not going to get any medical advice from this crew.
No.
And that leads into Act 4, which is kind of like we're approaching the climax of the game, and it's about tracking down the Kookie King to his home base, which is just called the Kookie Castle. And it's a section that's like almost dungeon crawl section where you're moving from room to room in the Kookie Castle. And that's kind of similar to something that happens in Portopia where there's a maze.
I was honestly expecting a first-person maze to crop up the way they were talking about it, but it's just a series of chambers, at least. It's not as tough to navigate, though. The first time you enter a room, you're not going to know which door is which. You don't know which door you just came through.
Very, very famously, infamously, I guess, Portopia's got a sequence where in order to beat a maze section, you have to just walk into the same wall over and over again until you get a different result.
Oh, that is my least favorite thing in these console adventure games. None of it actually in Idle Hakkenden, though. They avoided it.
Yeah. And in this kooky castle, as you move from room to room, you will encounter these group called the Kooky Quartets in the translation that we were playing. And again, it's a group of like washed up former stars.
Who are based on current stars, of course.
Yeah, I got the impression they were probably parodying like entertainment stars of the time, but obviously I had no idea who.
The guy with the sunglasses, I'm trying to remember his name. He's the guy who plays the stupid lord who got a weird version of track and field based on his character. I don't recall his name off the top of my head, though, but I'm pretty sure that's who it's supposed to be there. And there was another one I thought I identified, but I don't know enough about Japanese celebrities from the 80s to really go for it.
The only Japanese variety stars I was aware of were Kato-chan and Ken-chan, because they had a PC Engine game that got localized in the West as a game called JJ and Jeff. So, like, people might be vaguely aware of JJ and Jeff. But that started off as a licensed game based on two Japanese, like a manzai act, would you call them?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And yeah, they got this, like, toilet humor-themed platform game on the PC Engine, and it got inexplicably localized in the West as a game about two private detectives called JJ and Jeff.
Yeah, these celebrity games had a small period for maybe 5 years where they, for whatever reason, they just had a video game and a celebrity attached, and they ran with it.
An example of that, which you've actually covered, it was a game I'd seen, and I had no context for it, and I didn't know what it was. I'm like, is this a bootleg? Is this a ROM hack? What is this? Is All Night Nippon Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, yeah. That one's... Well, you've got nine comedians on that one.
Yeah, and that was, like, officially released through that TV studio. And it's a hack of Super Mario Brothers where they replace some of the graphics with caricatures of the comedians on that show.
It's actually a mix of Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 2, because later stages start switching things up. It's a very confusing release.
And yeah, the Kooky Quartet, when you meet them, they're all dressed as animals. And that's when it sort of started to click with me the first time I played it, what this is kind of doing, because it's like, oh yeah, if you've fallen out of the public eye, you're not famous anymore, the easy way to get attention again is to dress in a ridiculous costume and humiliate yourself on television, and then people will watch you again.
That's exactly what they're going for.
Yeah, and that leads into Act 5, where we actually meet the Kooky King. And it turns out that this is also his origin story. He's revealed to actually be Erika's grandfather. And he was, like, at an earlier point in time, like, during his prime, he was a famous, like, was he an actor or something?
Did he say actor or singer? I think he was an actor.
Yeah, he was this very, very successful actor. And he encountered the Kookies. And it says he defeated them, but then when he defeated them, he saw this, like, ridiculous cartoon hobby horse thing called Kooky Gallop. And when he touched that, the hobby horse possessed him and he became the Kooky King. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of what it's saying, isn't it? It's like this guy's career was on the skids. And he picked up this hobby horse and he's like, if I just ride this around like an idiot on television. People will watch me again. And that's the genesis of the Kooky King. And yeah, this Kooky King's plan is revealed, and he's going to use what he calls the Kooky Alpha Beam, which is his special, like, psychic power or something, in conjunction with a series of satellites. He's going to broadcast that across the planet and brainwash everyone into watching terrible late-night television. When you defeat him, Erika then hijacks that satellite system to broadcast her debut performance of Kimi wa Hoi Hoi Musume, and she becomes the world's greatest idol.
I don't know if I'd be happy with someone hijacking my TV.
So yeah, not the longest or most complicated or most difficult game, but a good time was had by all, I think. And something that you brought up before is like that there are people have released like CD versions of these songs, as obviously the Famicom couldn't really do voices for this. There's nowhere to hold that data. So on the Famicom, it's just burp, 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 burp. But yeah, people have done proper vocal versions of this.
Yeah, and recently too, as you said, people continue to perform it. I think the songs are even better known than the game, really.
Yeah, and also Natsume did a poll online about 10 years ago, asking people to pick like what their favorite Natsume character was. And when you think about like all the Natsume games out there, like, you know, Wild Guns, Shatterhand, Abadox, Harvest Moon, all these like kind of go-to like classics on their systems, out of all of them, Erika from Idle Hakkenden actually won that poll.
Huh.
Erika beat like the casts of all of those games, I think, because she is just such a memorable character in this game that is still pretty obscure.
Yeah, the beam worked.
I guess she showed me. Okay, I was going to say, there are 2 sequels, but you wouldn't know it if you just went looking for Idle Hakkenden. One used the same scenario designer, same person doing the music and lyrics, and was a kind of a strategy-ish game for the PC 98 called GQ Boei Shoujo Iko-chan UFO Daisakusen. Kind of a quirky little game, same style of humor. I don't think it's ever been translated into English in any form, officially or unofficially. But it's at least you can find videos out there and you can take a look and see what it's like. See their Erika stand-in fight some really weird-looking robots. The other is that there was a novel in 2014, part of a whole series of Famicom novels that were occurring at the time. And that one, rather than retelling the events of the game, is a sequel that follows the next 25 years of Erika's life.
Is that the Sun and Stars of the Southern Islands?
I think you've got it.
Yeah, I tried looking for it, actually. I couldn't find it.
I found the Japanese version on archive.org, but it's the Japanese version. I know that there was an English translation officially done like sometime later, but I've never found it. So yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our little Idle Hakkenden story. Does anyone have anything they want to say before we call it a night?
For Idle Hakkenden, it's an interesting game. Wonderful example of the command adventure games that were on consoles in the late 80s. Easy to pick up, easy to get through if you want to see what the genre was all about.
And David, I guess as the Famicom expert in the room, if the people out there really liked Idle Hakkenden, either the gameplay or the style of humor, like, what would you recommend they look into?
Well, obviously, Toho Kenbun Roku would be the next one. That was Natsume's first game. Very similar style of humor. Same easygoing structure for the adventure game. Let's see. Another great one is the Shin Onigashima series. It's a 2-disc release for the Famicom Disk System based on fairy tales. It's an absolutely delightful game to play. One of Nintendo's super obscure games outside of Japan, but really beloved in the country.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining us to discuss Idle Hakkenden. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. And if you're interested in Japanese games for the 80s, 8-bit stuff, you can find me on YouTube. Just look up RndStranger. I've got over 1,000 videos now.
Yeah, and I
Wow.
highly recommend David's work over at RndStranger on the various series that he's doing. Incredible commitment, incredibly informative. Yeah, I've learned so much from him, and he really deserves more love.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed talking to both of you.
Well, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye!
Bye. David, say bye.
Okay, bye!
I just had a dandy.
I tried to get a Dendy a couple of years ago when I was in Finland, right on the border. And I guess those didn't have a lot of cross-border trade.
I guess not. You could get one if you exchange it for like a pack of flour.
Should have done that.